Hi everyone. In this video I'm going to show one way to add a layer for California tribal areas to a web map. More specifically, I'm going to walk through how to add the cultural base map layer from the Digital Atlas of California Native Americans, which is published by the California Native American Heritage Commission, to an ArcGIS web map. So making maps of tribal areas and territories is tricky in general. First of all, the boundaries may not exist or clearly delineated. And quite often, even if there are boundaries, they may not necessarily be agreed upon by the tribes. This is particularly true in California, where there was a pattern of massive state-sanctioned land dispossession and dozens of tribes were cheated out of reservations and their federal recognition status. So therefore, even if you do find tribal boundaries from an entity like BIA, there's often a disconnect between those spatial units and what you're probably trying to represent on the map, which is more likely to be the distribution of people, or cultural, or history, or stewardship practices, or where dispossession took place, and so on and so forth. More fundamentally, maps of indigenous lands are tricky because the very concept of fixed boundaries doesn't really align very well with conceptualizations or the practices of managing territory and resources by indigenous people, which were far more dynamic and nuanced than fixed boundaries. And even the concept of tribe doesn't typically fit well, certainly in California, with the more complex, nested social and governance structures of Native people. So right from the get-go, making maps of tribal territories is a bit like trying to put a square peg into a round hole. That being said, though, representations of where Native people are and have been is really important. The tribal layer that we're going to use here is the cultural base map from the California Native American Heritage Commission. So some advantages of using this data from the NACH is that the NACH is an agency of the state of California, so it's supported. They have experts who understand these nuances and challenges and have been in communication with tribes and undergone a process to develop this digital atlas. So one of the things I like about this data source and this project is that they have on the website links to to pages that explain the cultural regions that they've delineated. And if we look at one of those pages, we'll look at one in a second here. It's essentially a list of contact information for the tribes in that area, right? So we're kind of, there is a map that you can look at, but the references go back to the tribes themselves. A couple other things to note. This is a screenshot of the digital atlas, which we're going to look at in a minute. The first thing that you see displayed in this web map is the cultural base map, right? So they're using this term cultural areas as a more general term than tribes or tribal areas, which don't, as we've just heard, don't really fit very well or have a lot of complications. Also, the first thing you might notice about this layer is that we don't actually see any boundaries. So we see labels, which are placed at the centroids of these areas. This is a polygon layer, so there are polygons under the hood, but what's being displayed are really just the labels of these areas. And that's appropriate for this kind of data, right? Where the boundaries are either not meaningful or not really agreed upon. Another thing which is nice about this atlas is that when you click on a label of one of these cultural areas, the pop-up window doesn't show a whole lot of information about it, but the main thing it has is a link that takes you back to the page on the Native American Heritage Commission website that gives you more information about who to contact to find out about the Native American people in this area. Right, so for these are some of the good practices that they've adopted in developing this project. And if we go to the map, and let me refresh it here, we'll just take a quick look at some of those best practices. And again, so here we are at a live copy of this map. And if I click on one of the labels for one of the cultural areas, I see that pop-up window that takes me, that provides a link to, in this case, a description of the Miwok cultural area. Okay, so this is what we're going to try to emulate and copy on an ArcGIS web map. So step number one to bring this layer into an ArcGIS web map is to get the URL for the map server for this layer, which I've got open here, and I will copy to the clipboard and put this also in the description for the video. And then I'm going into my ArcGIS Online contents page, and I'm going to click on, I've already created a folder for this little test project, and I'm going to click new item, and then I want to import an item from a URL, so I click that option, and then I'm going to paste in the map server URL, and it picks up that this is an ArcGIS server web service, and then I click next. It's going to ask me to give this layer a title. This is what I will see in my contents window. So I'm going to maintain the same label, so NACH cultural base map, and I'll call this copy 3. So I'm labeling it in a way that I will know that this is a layer from NACH, and I click Save. And it's going to create the feature service and then open it up in the item details page. Now, before we go further, I want to go back into my contents pane and take a look at what it brought in. So this is back in my contents window in ArcGIS Online, and I can see the feature layer that I just imported from a URL. And I want to highlight here that this came in as a feature layer and not as a feature layer hosted. So what that means, if it was a hosted feature layer, that means this would be a copy of these data in my ArcGIS Online account. But this is not that. This is a feature layer that is being hosted and comes from the Native American Heritage Commission, or more specifically, the California Natural Resources Agency, which is the GIS unit that supports the Native American Heritage Commission. So what that means is that if and when they update their data, this layer that I have and I'm using in my web maps will also be updated. And that's a good thing, because I am not the authority or the curator or maintainer for this data, right? So that's worth noting. That's also potentially a way things can break, though, right? So if the Native American Heritage Commission changed the field name or something like that, then my maps would break, and that's just part of working with GIS data. So now I'm back at the item details page. In a second here, we're going to go and look at it in a map viewer. But the first thing I want to look at is the data. So I click on the data tab here of this feature layer, and I can see a bunch of the columns, right? So we can see all of the columns in the table, most of which are empty, but there is a link column. And if I hover over these are the links that take me back to the cultural area description page on the website. And then there's a couple other columns that have the names of cultural areas, right? We're going to come back to this. The other thing I want to highlight, though, is that this layer has 328 layers or features. And here's a spoiler alert. There are not 328 cultural areas on the map. So we're going to come back and try to understand what are these additional polygons and what do we do about that. But let's go ahead and view the layer in a web map and start to think about how we want to symbolize it. So here we are looking at the layer in a web map, and I'll go ahead and save the web map right away so I don't lose it. And I'm just going to call this the Native American Heritage Cultural Base Map Copy 3. Okay, and I'll stick it in the test folder that I made for this project. and save it. Okay, so now I can just save and my changes will be saved. So one thing that we can note as we explore, so this is basically the symbology has been imported, because when you import a map server as opposed to a feature server, all of the symbology settings from the publisher come in, right? So as I zoom in, we can see the names of the tribal areas, but we also see the names of cities from the base map, and their style is almost identical. So this is one thing I think we can improve upon, and there's a couple ways that we can improve upon making the labels of the cultural areas stand out and differentiate a little bit more than the names of cities. One thing we can do is change the base map. So if I click on the base map property for my web map and then maybe go with a light gray canvas, already there's a little bit of differentiation between the labels, but we can further improve the differentiation, which we will do that in a second. But the other thing I'd like to do is explore the cultural base map data a little bit by actually looking at the polygons. So if I click on the layer, the cultural base map layer, and then in the properties window that pops up, if I edit the layer style, and right now, if I go to the style options, I can see that it's being displayed with a transparent or color and a transparent outline. And I change those up a little bit and click done. Let's try this again. Make the outline, there we go. So now we can see the polygons of this layer, and we can see that there's actually buffers between the boundaries between these cultural areas have been buffered. And that actually explains all of those extra polygons that we saw in the attribute table. Those are the polygons, the little slivers between the core tribal areas, right? So they've created these buffers to highlight the fuzziness of the borders, or the uncertainty of those borders. All right, so that's kind of as an FYI, but I'm going to go ahead and change the fill color back to transparency and the outline color to transparency, which is appropriate for this data. But next, let's go ahead and work on the labels a little bit more, right? So I'll click on the label property, and first thing I note is that the field from the attribute table that are being used for these labels is called map name. So we take note of that. I'm going to edit the label style so that they stand out even more, and I'm going to increase the size to 12. I'm going to select a bold font to make them stand out a little bit more, maybe pick a different color and give them a halo. All right, so this combination of settings for this labels will help differentiate the cultural area labels from any other labels that might be from the base map or other layers from the web map. All right, so I'm good with those. Something else I might want to take note of here is are the number of labels, right? So if I zoom out to if I zoom out of the map, ArcGIS Online will label as many features as it can without overlapping them. But some parts of the state, there are actually quite a lot of these cultural areas, and if I zoom in, I can see there's even more, right? So this presents a challenge. This is a web mapping design challenge. Excuse me. So at this zoom level, I'm missing some labels. I know that, and if I can zoom in more, I can see more that appear. This is not good, right? We don't, because at this point, some labels are kind of arbitrarily being hidden because they would overlap. So as a designer, I have to make a decision either to accept that, or I can prevent any labels from being visible by setting the zoom level. So, and that's what I'm going to do here, right? Because I don't want some tribes or cultural areas to their labels not appear kind of randomly. So the way you can do that is you change the visibility range of the labels such that if I'm zoomed out, say, to the whole state, like at this level, I don't want any labels to appear. So I set my visibility range to be just where I can see enough labels. This will also depend a little bit on your final web map, right? So I could collapse this part to give myself a little more screen real estate. All right, so that's a call that you should make, right? But you want to set the visibility range for your labels to manage that challenge of having some labels not appear based purely on the zoom level, right? So that's one way you can deal with that. Okay, the next thing we could do is let's go back to the item detail page and look at the all of those extra polygons, which could mess things up, right? Because when you click on that layer, it's going to show a pop-up, and some of the polygons, all those buffer zones, don't have data, right? So if I scroll down my 328 features, I know that there's 60 cultural areas, and everything after that, there's no value in the map name fields, right? So these are all those buffered boundaries that they created. And we don't want these to be on our web map, because again, if you click on them, they're kind of, I won't say no man's land, but they're boundaries that don't have any pop-up information. So the way we're going to deal with that is back here in the layer properties in the web map. I'm going to click on the filter button, and I'm going to add a filter condition that says do not show or only show features where map name is not an empty string, right? So if I do that and click save, then now all of those boundaries, polygons are gone. And if we want to verify that, we can visualize the boundaries one more time temporarily by changing the fill color and the outline color. And now we can see when I do that, indeed, all of those other polygons have been filtered out, which is what we want, or it's what I want. So we click done. And the last thing we're going to do here is work on the pop-ups. Because right now, if I click on a label or something close to it, this is the default pop-up. And it's a field list. This is what your default pop-up always looks like. And let's go ahead, we can make some improvements here because most of these attributes have no useful data. So I'm going to click on the pop-ups properties. And here we see the default elements in the pop-up. The title is the name of the layer, colon, and then the name of the value from the map name field. I'm going to edit that just a little bit. I do want to maintain that this is a cultural area as opposed to a tribal area. I think that's an important detail to preserve. So I'll call it cultural area, and then colon, and then the name of the cultural area. Right. So so we've changed the title. This field list is not fixable, right? It's just field list is not a nice way to show the data here. So I'm just going to nuke this field list completely. So it's completely gone from the pop-ups. And I'm going to add something else instead. I'm going to click Add Content, and then we're going to add a text box. And this is really easy to edit text boxes because if I type the open curly bracket here, as I've done, it's going to show me a list of the fields in the attribute table. And the one that I want to be first in the pop-up window is the map name. That's the name of the cultural area. So I click enter there, and then I can even make this bold by clicking the B button. And then underneath it, I'm going to say more info, colon, and then this is where I'm going to put the URL to the website, to the page about that area. And that's saved under a column called link 1. So if I click OK there and click on one of the labels. As you can see, it's looking pretty good. The only thing that's missing, though, is that this hyperlink, this URL is not hyperlinked, right? I can't click on it. So to make that change, I'm going to click Edit Text and then highlight the URL code, including the curly braces. Click on the Add or Insert URL, paste that in there. So that's going to become the active URL. And click OK. So now when I do that and I click on one of these labels, we can actually we get a live link to the Native American Heritage website. So we'll stop there, but in a nutshell, we have imported the cultural areas layer from the Native American Heritage Commission's Digital Atlas of California Indians, and we've kind of recreated the symbology, and we've recreated the pop-ups to make them look good. And if you basically repeat this process in your web map, then you can use this data as a kind of proxy for California tribes, but also give the viewers of your web map easy access to a page on the Native American Heritage Commission that actually provides, for example, where to get more information about that cultural area. So I hope this was useful, and if you found it useful, please like and subscribe. Thank you.